Hey, you guys. Good morning. I got my coffee. Gonna go over this crazy thing I found. Remember, I said that there was a study where they were depriving rights to children and women who are white in a program that receives federal funding, which is illegal. They can't do that, but they do that because there's a proposed orphanage study about racist, or, scientific, it's called scientific racism. So scientists hatched an outrageous plan to settle a question at the heart of American racial thought. Were differences between racial groups driven by environment or heredity? In other words, was the racist social order of the time, white over black, an inevitable and genetically driven outcome? Or did the environment in which all Americans lived create the deep disparities and discord between races that define social, economic, political reality of the United States? A committee on racial problems, jointly sponsored, blah, 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 discussed an experiment. Create racial orphanages. Separate institutions where children of different races would be received as close to birth as possible. The idea was to compare white and black children under similar conditions. Scientists could closely monitor the institutionalized children as they developed to figure out whether differences were due to innate characteristics or environmental influence. Nursery schools and foster homes were proposed as places of comparative study. So they're literally doing experiments on foster kids, orphans, and other people. But most of the committee's discussions focused on the idea of racial orphanages. Scientists made claims about race in America since the late 18th century, when Thomas Jefferson hypothesized that the differences between races are fixed in nature. In the 19th century, anthropologists such as Samuel Morton argued for a racial hierarchy of intelligence and believed human races evolved from separate origins. This is the terrible part, you guys. Eugenicists tried to quantify the heredity nature of race difference in the 20th century using their science to develop social policy, including forced sterilization and anti-immigration laws. Racism has indeed left its stain on scientific thought. They're doing this, you guys. I watched the new Marilyn Monroe documentary. And it talks about Holly Grove. And I think Holly Grove Orphanage is just a place where if they steal you from your real mother, they can put you in Holly Grove, whether really at the Holly Grove or just in name at the Holly Grove. And Holly Grove is actually, I think right now, hidden in Oregon or some other place. It used to be on, in Hollywood itself. The building is still there. They redid the building. The building is it's one of the most disturbing buildings I've ever seen. I get the creeps when I see it. I'll show it to you in a minute. Okay, so that's, again, forced sterilization and anti-immigration laws. So they're forcing sterilization and then allowing immigration to occur, because they're developing social policy. You have to realize they're doing this, claiming that we have anti-immigration laws, but they're really stealing somebody's right to procreate and then killing them on paper and then giving them the right, giving them somebody else the right to come to our country. Racism has indeed left its stain on scientific thought. The Committee on Racial Problems was no different. Its 1930 report alleged the racial orphanage experiment could throw light. They always talk about light. You're a light. On how heredity and environment influenced health, vigor, intelligence, and sociability. To do this, scientists would try to improve the condition of Black children in the study by altering environmental factors, including shielding the children from racism, offering improved nutrition, and providing better education opportunities than they might have otherwise had. Okay, what they're not telling you about the study is that white children are not given the same opportunities as Black children. And I've been telling you this in the study. I'm not saying in all things. I'm saying if you're chosen for the study like I was, you don't have any rights in school. And that in a school that has money from the federal government, it's a violation under Title I think it's Title 11. It's XI, whatever that is. I think that's 11. And Title 7, right? Okay. The idea for the experiment came from Dr. Joseph Peterson, a psychologist at George Peabody. There's that word again, Peabody. I kept finding this name the other day. He proposed the experimenters have complete control over children enrolled in the study from birth through schooling years. Complete control, meaning if they don't want you to work, you're not going to work. If they don't want you to have opportunities or to be an actress, you can't, you're not going to be able to. Again, they talk about skull sizes between races. That's why they are talking about the right to study your skull. At a 1930 meeting to discuss the proposal's feasibility, now we got a feasibility study. You guys, there's all different studies. My mother admitted to being a study for many, many years. Torture. It's a torture study, you guys. Concerns were raised on a number of issues. Could the differences in care between the Black and white children be controlled? Could the children be shielded from racist world around them? And how would the children be recruited into such a study? Here we go. Recruitment proved to be a sticking point. In a chilling exchange, psychologist Knight Dunlop from Johns Hopkins and Clark Whistler, an anthropologist at American Museum of Natural History, discussed the difficulty of obtaining children. And these are stolen children, you guys. In the study, it can't be a live birth, because then your mother would have to be a sociopath that's keeping you in the study, or a psychopath. Dunlop worried about the difficulty in getting a perfect sampling of children away from their parents. Weisler's response: suppose you took infants completely at random. If we are interested in the question of how much the actual life creates bias, shouldn't you have random selection? The committee went on to debate whether it would be more desirable in the study to take orphans in order to be free from the home environment, or whether taking Negro children away from Negro families would be better for the proposed experiment. Okay, so this part gets weird, but they're not telling you the race of this part right here. And because Marilyn Monroe is talking about Hollygrove, I started looking into it. She's talking about Hollygrove and RCA, which led to Karen Lamberton of Capitol Records, owned now by Polygram Entertainment, and she works for RCA, where she fired me and fires women because the women are worth billions of dollars to the industry later. So they you're hired by Gramercy Pictures and then fired. Or they say, oh, we're downsizing or whatever. Gramercy is CIA. Capitol Records is getting people for slavery through Karen Lamberton. Karen Ducker does a different job. She just writes disgusting things about stealing people's ovaries and uteruses and giving them lobotomies and keeping them incarcerated so that the government can enact that research. I mean, she's a psychopath, but so is Karen Lamberton. When you read about Karen Lamberton, they're always like, she always delivers. She's a psychopath. They fire you without you ever having done anything wrong, without ever telling you what you did wrong. This happens again and again. Okay, what Dunlop and Whistler meant when they talked about taking children from black families isn't clear. Do you see how they don't talk about this line? Desirable in this study to take orphans, all right? Because they're studying whites. It's not, they always focus on this to make it seem about racist against blacks. It's also against whites, you guys. So they don't talk about this line. Whether they wanted to forcibly remove black children from their homes. What about the whites they're taken from the orphanages? They're not talking about that. They're not talking about that. But they did mention at the beginning of this whole document that it's whites and blacks they're studying to provide, black families, black children, more opportunities in education. All right. More means whites are getting less if you're in the study. If you're in the study, I'm not saying everyone's in the study. What Dunlop and Whistler meant when they were taking children from black families isn't clear. Whether they wanted to forcibly remove black children from their homes or had in mind some form of consent or some incentive is unknown. It's ironic that the closest the committee came to any level of concern for the children was wondering what would happen to black children raised in an environment shielded from racism once they became adults, left the orphanages, and experienced the full force of American racism. But okay. By today's standards, such an experiment seems preposterous and disgraceful, but they're doing the experiment. My mother's in this experiment. I'm part of the experiment. Remember I said there's an experiment that follows you from childbirth through school, where they have complete control over the way you work, the way you're allowed to have health care, all of that. My mother, I know you guys say I look like her. There's no way I could be my mother's daughter. There's absolutely no way. I demand a DNA test. Preposterous because the implicit and explicit racism that shaped and limited such a study. Disgraceful both because of the inferiority committee members ascribed to an entire race. What? Disgraceful both because of the inferiority committee members ascribed to the entire race. Do you see how they do this? Now they're twisting it to say that the study itself is racist, even though they said the study had to do with white and black children. Both. Even while debating an experiment to see if that alleged inferiority was or was not innate, and because there was no consideration of the ethical implications of placing children in an orphanage under experimental conditions. The only good news in this history is that the study never went forward. That is not true. That is not true. They're doing this study in a different way. They're just doing it while the people are at home. And they do talk about, when you look at the feasibility studies, trust me, they're doing this study. I guarantee it. Because that new thing that just came out with profiles and Messenger and everything on the Marilyn Monroe study or Marilyn Monroe documentary, she is talking about Hollygrove and RCA and how they get access to keeping you in these kinds of experiments your whole life. Even while debating an experiment to see if the alleged inferiority was or was not. Okay. Talking about debate. Argument and debate. A and D. It says the study died. Nope. Yet at the same time, preparations were beginning for another awful and unethical racial experiment. Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was also performed on white people, which they never tell you, was in the earliest stages of its 40-year study. They're doing it literally to people for 40 and 50 years. So the person could never earn money, could never be healthy. It was a federally sponsored project and assumed that traits believed to unique to African Americans and whites were worthy of both study and expense.